Welcome to Pulling It All Together, a lecture on homework, lesson design, and authentic assessment. Teachers have to implement all kinds of lessons, techniques, ways to manage classrooms, in addition to trying to teach the content that students need. Some ideas work and some do not. This lecture is about putting some of the better ideas in a workable format for veteran teachers who want to fix some minor glitches in their lesson designs, and for newer teachers who want a practical framework of how these ideas, programs, and techniques work together. There are 3 points to this lecture. The first is homework. I use homework as an example, but the word homework could be replaced with participation, organization, or loose ideas of classwork grades. The word homework represents the non-content areas that wind up as headings in our grade books. Sometimes they represent student learning, but usually not. These types of grades assess whether or not a task was completed, not always student learning or student understanding. The second part of this lecture discusses lesson planning, thematic unit lesson planning, and how this is used to develop lessons that focus on student learning and student understanding. The third part of this lecture reviews authentic assessment, both formative assessments that check for understanding and summative authentic assessments that should demonstrate understanding, and how these assessments combine to culminate in project-based learning. These 3 ideas, homework, lesson design, and authentic assessment, are the key points of this lecture. We'll begin with homework. The general question you have to ask yourself is, what is the purpose of homework? What is the purpose of the homework I'm assigning? Is it for practice? Is it to demonstrate learning? Is it to keep the kids off the streets at night? There's nothing wrong with homework. It does give practice, and it can also help to notify and involve the parents in what is going on in the classroom. As long as you're aware of the exact purpose of the assignment you're giving. In addition, it's important to know that your students are aware of why they are being assigned homework. Have you ever asked them? Do they know why homework is assigned to them? The next subject is a bit more complicated. It's grading. Is grading homework appropriate? Or at least, is grading the homework that I'm assigning appropriate? Only certain types of homework should be graded. Homework that represents practice should not be graded. Homework that actually demonstrates student learning and student understanding should be graded. The third question is, what could replace homework? If we're missing the homework grades that we rely on, what can we replace them with? %70 of the teachers in the United States use homework to calculate grades. 20% in Canada, 14% in Japan, and 9% in Singapore. Are the hours you spend grading homework worth it? Is it worth it to chase down students who have incomplete homework? Especially when sometimes it's after the test has already been taken, and then you're going back and trying to find who's missing what. And always at the end of the marking period, last 2 weeks, you're trying to get the zeros out of the grade book. So teachers were asked why they grade homework. Why is homework so important? And they gave 3 typical answers. Because if we don't grade it, the students won't do it. And that's probably true. The second answer, because we believe that if you work, there are rewards, and if you don't work, there are consequences. And the third answer was because it supplements assessment grades. The third answer is the one that adds to the problem with grading. If grades are averaged, high scores for completing tasks, these are usually our homework grades, our participation grades, our grades for organization, for being prepared for class, they mask the poor performance of the students on their tests. We tend to mix practice and checking for understanding with actual demonstrations of learning. And this clouds the picture of the student's progress. If a student is really great at being prepared for class, but they're not understanding the content, they're going to get low scores on the tests. However, their end grade won't represent that because it's mixed with their preparedness, their organization skills. It doesn't show that they may not understand any of the concepts that's been taught to them in, like, math. Most teachers feel that their options are limited when it comes to grading. So what can we do? The first thing we want to do is assess which homework should be graded and which should not. This is done by checking if the homework you are assigning is a formative demonstration of learning, if it's something that could be put in a portfolio, or if it's a summative demonstration of learning, if it really does show that the student knows the content, or if it's just practice. And again, practice isn't something that we want to grade. The second thing is to tie homework to assessments. If a student knows that they're able to use their homework to help them with the culminating test or the culminating project, then they're more apt to do the homework. And the third is to focus on learning demonstration and not task completion. Let's not assign homework just because it happens to be a page in the book. Let's not assign homework because we feel that we have to assign something in that content area because we don't have enough grades in that content area. Homework should be either a demonstration of learning or should not be. When the end goal is student understanding, and that is our end goal, then the first thing you want to do is look at your content standards. Because the content standards are the targets of learning, and they're the basis of your summative assessments. Student learning is the basis of summative assessment, and we get to that learning, and that learning is revealed to us through documentation of performance in portfolio assessments. For example, if my big idea, my content standard is poetry, then I'm going to get to that understanding through the assessments and the projects and the demonstrations that occur along the way. When understanding is the goal, curricular planning is purposeful. What will the students learn today? That has to be your question. What do I want my students to learn today? Not what is the objective, not what is the lesson that I have planned, not what's the next chapter in the book. It's what do I want my students to learn today? Teachers are the coaches of understanding, not the observers. We don't sit back and observe, and we don't profess and the students take in our knowledge. We're coaches of understanding. We're facilitators of learning. When student understanding is the goal, and when student understanding takes place, students are able to self-assess. They're able to peer review, and they're able to make decisions. So what does this look like? How do we get to this? The first thing we do is establish the goal. What is the relevant content standard that you want your thematic unit to address? So you look at your content standards, you pick your content standard. What I do is over the summer I will take all of my content standards and I'll align them into months, which ones I want to hit each month and which ones go together, because they're not always aligned for teaching. Now, you may have that in your curriculum, in your school curriculum. They may have aligned your standards in a way that makes sense, or you can do it yourself. As long as you're teaching to the standards and it makes sense to you and it makes sense to the students, that's the goal. You want students to be able to understand what's going on. So you take your content standards, you take the understandings, the big ideas, the essential questions, and you align them all together in a way that they make sense. Then you look at the key knowledge that the students are going to acquire from that content standard. Once you look at the standard, you ask yourself, what is important here? What is the key knowledge? And as a result of this knowledge, what should the students be able to do? So I've got my ideas, I've got the knowledge that is within those ideas, and then I've got the skills and what the kids will be able to do. Then I want to start to design the evidence that is going to prove that the students have learned and understand this knowledge. And we do that through authentic performance tasks. Summative assessments demonstrate student understanding. The learning the students need to master along the way to be able to perform and demonstrate the understanding are our formative assessments. And then we have student reflections. The formative assessments, the student reflections, even some of the summative assessments will all be able to be kept in portfolio for portfolio assessment. And then you have your larger demonstration, which is usually your project-based learning, project-based assessment. So we begin with the content standards. Then we're going to design our project-based goals according to student interest. This helps in differentiating. So if I have a class that I know is completely taken in with football, I'm going to want to design my lessons or my thematic unit with a football theme. Then we design our formative and summative assessments. Once I look at my standard and the knowledge that's within that standard, I design the demonstrations along the way that are going to show me that the students have learned and they understand the content. When you're designing your formative and summative assessments, create a couple of them so that the students can choose what type of summative assessment they prefer. Allow for multiple summative assessments. Always allow for redos and retakes without penalty. And allow students to skip the formative assessments if they're ready to take or perform the summative assessment. If I have a content standard, and we'll go back to poetry, if my content standard has to do with poetry, and one of my summative assessments is a personal poem, creating a personal poem, in order to get to that summative assessment, in order for the students to be able to complete that summative assessment, I need a couple of formative assessments along the way to show me that they understand. They may analyze someone else's poem. That would be a formative assessment, culminating to the summative assessment of them creating their own poem. These are things that will demonstrate to me that the student understands. Then for my project-based learning, I will have them create a poetry cafe. So in order for them to participate in the poetry cafe, they have to have their own original poem. And that's the summative assessment that leads to the project-based learning. And along the way, they'll analyze somebody else's poem, which is their formative assessment. Now, maybe I have 3 formative assessments lined up. They might be 3 different authors, 3 different poems, and analyzing all of them. If a student creates their own poem, and I am certain that they understand what it was they did to create that poem, and they can even analyze their own poem, then maybe they don't have to do all 3 of the formative assessments. At that point, one of the formative assessments may become basically busy work for them because they've already done the summative assessment, or they're already capable of performing the summative assessment. I would then let them move on to helping to design the poetry cafe. Design the self-assessment or peer review. Allow the students to design their own self-assessment and peer review once in a while, not all the time. I'm not big on having students, design their own curriculum and designing all of the lessons and things like that. I do like their input, and I do think that that's important. But for me, I like to guide the students a bit more than that. But I do think it's important that students are allowed to design some self-assessments and some peer reviews. And these assessments and peer reviews are really great for portfolios. So you want to keep them in your portfolio assessment. When you're thinking about authentic assessment, which is also performance-based assessment, you realize that the difference between authentic assessments and finishing the questions at the end of a chapter of a book, assessments like that, is that the authentic assessments demonstrate a deeper understanding. They show that the students are able to think critically. They often require analyzing information, comprehending new ideas, problem solving, and being able to make sound decisions based on evidence. These are all 21st century learning skills. These are the things that businesses are looking for people to be able to do. And these are the skills we want our students to have. For authentic assessment, you have to use outside sources. We're veteran teachers here. We know that we don't start at page 1 and just work our way through the book. That doesn't work. That doesn't benefit our students. It doesn't benefit anybody. The assessment must be technically sound. You want to make sure that you're assessing what you're teaching, you're assessing what the students are learning, you're assessing what they understand, and your assessment actually does show understanding. The assessment and its consequences must be perceived as fair, especially when you're differentiating, because we do want to be able to give the students choices of what assessments they take according to their learning styles. We want to make sure that their choices are fair, not to make one assignment incredibly large and another one not so large just because it happens to be a different learning style. And even if we may know that the assessments are fair, it's important that the students perceive them as fair. The assessment has to coordinate with the objectives, what you were teaching, what you are teaching, what the students are learning, and the assessment must have a reasonable timeline. And timeline is important. When we're talking about authentic assessment and we're talking about project-based learning and we're talking about understanding by design and thematic unit lesson plans, these are not 1 week, 1 block lesson plans. These are 4 to 6 week lesson plans that you're designing to be able to really have the students demonstrate understanding of the content. So forms of authentic assessment are portfolios, which are a collection of student work and includes your summative assessments and some of your formative assessments and some of your students' reflections and peer reviews. Another form of authentic assessment is Socratic seminars. And this is the exploration of student ideas that deepens understanding. It's not just a discussion, but it's a discussion that really deepens student understanding. It's usually a semi-structured dialogue, and it's facilitated by the teacher, guided by the teacher. Questions are asked by the teachers, and the students explore those questions. Now, how do you assess that? Well, you can use the popsicle stick method, where you ask questions and choose a popsicle stick and let the student talk, but that's not really a Socratic seminar. A Socratic seminar is more spontaneous than that. When you ask the question, the students should be able to really engage and really pick up the ideas. Raising hands isn't always necessary, isn't always advocated. So you want to make sure you have some sort of chart with their names on it, so you can sort of check off when they contribute and assess that along the way. Make it an ongoing assessment throughout the entire unit. Another form of authentic assessment is the exhibition, and this is the public demonstration of student learning. This is usually the culminating event that happens after a thematic unit, something that the students are working for. This is the big idea. This is what you would start with in Understanding by Design. Usually a poetry cafe, something that the parents can attend, a science fair. This is your culminating project. And project-based learning, applying understanding and skills to solve real-world problems. If you are holding a science fair, which is your exhibition, your projects along the way should try to solve real-world problems. This is where students get to think critically. This is where students get to analyze what's going on. And you emphasize analysis in forms of authentic assessment. You want the students to really think about the underlying premise of everything. You want to emphasize communication skills, and this is why exhibition is important, so the students can speak publicly. You want to emphasize meaningful problem solving. You want to use the internet, use the problems of the world, have the students discuss it. You want to write consistently throughout the thematic unit for a variety of purposes. Documenting everything. Students should know how to document. Students should be able to take notes without them being put on the board. I find that that is one of the things that my middle school students are particularly need coaching with. They want everything on the board, for me to write everything on the board, and aren't at that point where they're able to take notes on their own just by me speaking. And you want to collaborate across disciplines. Get your colleagues involved. Talk to other people who may be doing like-minded projects and put them together. Students love to see the teachers collaborate. So what does the grading look like for a lesson plan like this? The grading is basically the same. You have points that are earned out of points that are possible. This is your ABC grading. It's nothing different. The percent correct, the class average. Obviously the class averages are pretty low in this particular project, so I might want to revisit a lot of the things. But basically the grading is the same. It's still ABC, which makes the parents happy because that's what they like to see. However, look at what you're grading. You're not grading book chapters. You're not grading paper assignments. You're grading reading comprehension. Did this person understand what they were reading? You're grading a persuasive poem that was created. And these are the formative assessments. The self-evaluation and a literary exploration. These are tasks that are going to have the student think critically. They're tasks that are going to have them analyze. And then you go to your summative assessments, which are usually your larger, more culminating tests. And you have a literary response analysis. Personal criticism, personal critique, being able to criticize, to think critically, to look at poetry, to look at what they're learning and try to figure out, why is this important? Back to our original question. What is the purpose of homework? What is the purpose of what we're teaching? The students need to ask that too. And then the project-based final culminating assessment is the presentation for the Poets Cafe, which again stresses communication, is an exhibition, and will bring in the parents and administration from the outside. So the point of this is to stress the importance of thematic unit, project-based lesson design, and authentic assessment, and to hopefully give you options to not have to use homework, participation, and organization grades by using the summative and the formative assessments along the way, and actually grading student learning and student understanding and their demonstrations of learning and understanding. Then perhaps the need for 600s to balance the poor test grades won't be so necessary. I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you.